As a rule, a legal state of war has existed between Israel and her Arab enemies since the beginning of the First War in 1948. Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1979, and Jordan made peace in 1994. The Palestine Authority, headed by Yasser Arafat and his Al-Fatah faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization, negotiated a semi-peace, which, from mid-2000 on, has been destroyed through the Al-Aqsa Intifada violence. Other Palestinian groups, most notably Hamas, have been at war with Israel continuously. Although Israel and most Arab nations are technically in a continuous state of war, unless otherwise noted, specific outbreaks of fighting are considered to be separate wars. Israeli War of Independence, also known as the Al-Nakba, the disaster 1948 to 1949, upon independence, Israel was invaded by the armies of 6 Arab nations: Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, later Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq and Saudi Arabia. In addition, local Arab Palestinian forces also fought the Jewish Israelis. Kirbya raid October 1951, Israeli troops, led by Major Ariel Sharon, Israeli Prime Minister, 2001 to 2006, destroyed dozens of buildings in the West Bank Jordan town of Kirbya. Civilian deaths reached 69. Egyptian seizure of the Israeli ship Bat Galim, summer 1954. Egypt seized the Israeli ship Bat Galim as it attempted to enter the Suez Canal. According to various international agreements, the Suez Canal is supposed to be accessible to ships of all nations. This provoked worsening tensions between Israel and Egypt. Gaza raid February 28, 1955. Israeli forces conducted a raid, a response to repeated guerrilla attacks, and the seizure of an Israeli ship by Egypt resulted in the deaths of 51 Egyptian soldiers and 8 Israeli troops. This raid was the largest of its kind against Arab forces since the end of the First Arab-Israeli War in 1949. The Sinai War 1956, also known as the Suez War, the invasion and temporary conquest of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula by Israel, while France and Great Britain seized the Suez Canal. Palestinian-Israeli conflict 1960 to the present. Israel faced guerrilla and terrorist warfare from several Palestinian armies, most of whom united under the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO), led by Yasser Arafat. Current fighting involves Israel against more religiously militant groups such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad, as well as against Arafat's Palestinian Authority. This includes the Palestinian guerrilla warfare against Israel from the 1960s, original Intifada 1988 to 1992, and the current Al-Aqsa Intifada 2000 to the present, and the West Bank 2004 and Gaza invasions 2006 by Israel, and the Palestinian suicide and rocket attacks which prompted those invasions. First Al-Fatah PLO raid December 31, 1964. Yasser Arafat's Al-Fatah faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization conducted its first raid into Israel from Lebanon. Israeli-Syrian border and air battle November 13, 1964. Israel and Syria both claimed sovereignty over several demilitarized zones along their border. These zones were set up as part of the ceasefire ending the First Arab-Israeli War. Israel attempted to farm the land in these zones, while Syria developed a project to divert water from the Jordan River, which Israel shared with both Syria and Jordan. Syrian forces often fired on Israeli tractors attempting to farm the zones, while Israel looked for ways to interrupt the Syrian diversion project. On November 13, 1964, Syrian forces stationed on the top of the Golan Heights, a plateau overlooking Israeli territory in the Jordan River Valley, fired on Israeli tractors. Israeli forces returned fire. Syrian artillery then targeted Israeli civilian villages. Israel responded with air attacks on Syrian forces. This battle resulted in 4 Israeli dead and 9 wounded. Syrian losses included 2 tanks and machines involved in the diversion project. One result of this clash was Syria's accelerated acquisition of more and better Soviet-made fighter planes. West Bank raids May 1965. After Palestinian guerrilla raids resulting in the deaths of 6 Israelis, the Israeli military conducted raids on the West Bank towns of Qalqilia, Shuna and Jenin. 1966 Israel reported 93 incidents along its borders. West Bank raid April 30, 1966. Israeli forces destroyed over 24 houses in the West Bank town of Rafat, killing 11 civilians. This attack was in response to Palestinian raids on Israel. West Bank raids 1966. Israeli forces raided the Hebron area of the West Bank. These raids resulted in 8 civilian deaths and firefights with the Jordanian army. Israeli-Syrian border battles summer 1966. Continued artillery and tank duels along the Golan Heights front led to Israeli-Syrian air battle July 7, 1966. Responding to the continued fighting along the border, Israeli planes attacked Syrian forces, resulting in the loss of 1 Syrian MiG fighter plane. Israeli-Syrian air-sea battle August 15, 1966. After an Israeli patrol boat ran aground on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. According to the 1949 ceasefire agreement, Israeli forces were not supposed to approach within 250 meters of the eastern shore, which was a demilitarized zone. Syrian planes attacked it. Israel responded, shooting down 2 MiG planes. Samba raid West Bank November 13, 1966. Following a landmine explosion which killed 3 Israeli policemen and wounded 1, Israel decided to launch a large retaliatory raid called Operation Shredder into the West Bank, to strike at a Palestinian Al-Fatah guerrilla base near Hebron. Designed to show Israeli military strength, the raiding force consisted of 10 tanks, 40 half-tracks, a troop transportation vehicle and around 400 soldiers. The force enjoyed air cover from Israeli warplanes. This force destroyed a police station at the town of Rum al-Madfa and then moved on to the town of Samu. As the Israelis demolished houses in Samu, a small Jordanian force approached and was ambushed by the Israelis. This battle resulted in 15 Jordanian dead and 54 wounded. The leader of the Israeli ambush was killed and 10 of his men wounded. Israeli planes chased off the Jordanian Air Force, shooting down a Jordanian fighter plane. This raid also resulted in 3 Arab civilian deaths and 96 wounded. Besides the large numbers of casualties on both sides from what was supposed to be a relatively swift and easy raid, Israel suffered diplomatic setbacks. The United States was quite upset over this large attack on one of Washington's few Arab friends, Jordan's King Hussein, and at the lack of response to the Syrians, who were the true sponsors of most Palestinian attacks in Israel. Riots broke out in Jordan at the seemingly ineffectual response of the Jordanian military and its apparent inability to protect Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. The Samba raid inflamed Arab public opinion in the Middle East and turned out to be one of the factors leading up to the Six-Day War of 1967. The Six-Day War 1967, in a rapid preemptive attack, Israel crushed the military forces of Egypt, Jordan and Syria and seized large amounts of land from each. Iraq also participated in the fighting on the Arab side. The War of Attrition 1968 to 1970. The War of Attrition was a limited border war fought between Egypt and Israel in the aftermath of the Six-Day War. It was initiated by Egypt as a way to recapture the Sinai Peninsula after losing it to Israel in 1967. A ceasefire in 1970 ended the fighting, but left the borders unchanged. The Yom Kippur Ramadan War 1973, in a surprise attack launched on the Jewish Yom Kippur holiday. The dates also fell on the Muslim Ramadan holiday. Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. Despite aid from Iraq, the Arab forces failed to defeat Israel. Israeli invasion of Lebanon 1978. Operation Litani was the official name of Israel's 1978 invasion of Lebanon up to the Litani River. The invasion was a military success, as the Israeli military expelled the PLO from southern Lebanon, where they had created a de facto state within a state. An international outcry over the invasion forced a partial Israeli retreat and the creation of a United Nations patrol buffer zone between the Arab guerrillas and the Israeli military. The Osirak raid 1981, an Israeli air attack on Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. The Israeli invasion of Lebanon 1982 to 1984, in response to repeated guerrilla attacks by the PLO, which were launched from South Lebanon. Israel invaded with the intent of destroying Arafat's forces. Syria, which maintained a large army in Lebanon, fought Israel and suffered an embarrassing defeat.